ファンの力を最大限に生かして、やっぱり自分たちのやりたいゲームで、自分たちが作りたいゲーム、それをみんなに示すことができればな。キックスターターのおかげで僕たちの夢もファンの夢も叶う時が来ると思います。みんなで力を合わせていいゲームを作っていきましょう。みんなの力を貸してください。キックスターターで夢を叶えましょう。
It's hard not to talk about iconic video game franchises of the 80s and 90s without mentioning Capcom's run-and-gun platformer Mega Man. At the time of its release, Capcom didn't expect that the first game, known as Rockman in Japan, would be successful, and in the US at least it wasn't. But despite poor sales, the game, which was developed by a team of only 6 Capcom employees, received a positive critical reception. So Capcom took a chance and continued working on the series, and Mega Man went on to become one of the most beloved franchises of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Mega Man's success led to 5 sequels on the NES, as well as a 7th game on the Super Nintendo and an 8th game on the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Windows. Not to mention several spin-off series that either took the run-and-gun gameplay and built upon it, or spun off into their own genres entirely. After years of focusing on spin-offs, Capcom finally went back to Mega Man's roots with the series that started it all, usually referred to as the Classic series, which hadn't seen a new game since Mega Man and Bass back in 1998. They released 2 new entries, Mega Man 9 and 10, in 2009 and 2010 respectively, which deliberately harkened back to the NES days in terms of gameplay and aesthetics, most likely in an attempt to draw back fans of the originals. But after that, Mega Man just kind of fell off the radar. Capcom stopped producing Mega Man games after Mega Man 10, leaving the franchise and its several sub-series on hold, primarily due to the departure of one of Mega Man's original creators, Keiji Inafune. Inafune was one of the directors of the first Mega Man game alongside Akira Kitamura, and he worked primarily as a character and enemy designer. He would continue in this role for most of the Classic series before becoming a producer for Mega Man X, Mega Man Legends, and Mega Man Battle Network. However, after Mega Man 10, Inafune left Capcom, citing his dissatisfaction with Japanese game developers and a need to move on from the company. He founded the studio Concept, which began releasing games in 2011, most notably the PlayStation Vita action RPG Soul Sacrifice, which Inafune was the lead designer for. Then, on August 31st, 2013, Inafune and Concept announced a new project that was a spiritual successor to Mega Man called Mighty No. 9. It was pitched as a side-scrolling shooter platformer that would take heavy inspiration from the classic Mega Man games, while also updating the design to appeal to modern gamers as well. Concept started a Kickstarter campaign for the game that blew up, receiving heavy publicity from the gaming press and reaching its initial goal of $900,000 within 2 days, finally raising $3.84 million by the time the campaign ended on October 1st, plus about $200,000 raised from PayPal donations, bringing the total amount of money fans donated to the project to just over $4 million. It was clear to everybody, fans wanted Mighty No. 9, and since Capcom wouldn't satisfy their desires for a new Mega Man game, it seemed like Inafune and his team were giving them exactly what they wanted. Now Concept had the funds and fan support necessary to make the game a reality. And that's when the Mighty No. 9 success story took a major downfall that gradually snowballed into a disaster. Concept added numerous stretch goals to the project after the initial goal was met, including full English voice acting, multiplayer modes, and other extra features. Not to mention promises to port the game to every console that was relevant at the time. These features would have been fine if they were part of a long-term plan to support the game after its release, but Concept wanted all the stretch goals to be present at launch, perhaps as a way to make the game worth the $4 million that backers gave them. But that was a terrible approach. The Kickstarter campaign raised about $3.84 million US, but you have to remember that that number isn't indicative of the final budget. Kickstarter takes a cut of the money raised by successful campaigns, and outside circumstances might force the game's budget to be slashed even further. Reportedly, after factoring in all costs, only 60% of the Kickstarter money raised actually went towards the game, which would bring the budget down to about $2.03 million. That's still enough money to make a decent game as long as you don't spread your resources too thin. But since Concept wanted to include everything they promised backers in one package, it was just too much for them to financially handle. Mighty No. 9 was initially set to release in spring of 2015, but after 4 major delays, the launch date was pushed back to June 21st, 2016. Now, delays are not uncommon for any piece of media, including video games, and if they have a clear reason that's explained well enough, people can generally accept them. And while Mighty No. 9's delays were clearly a result of Concept overstuffing their game with features, not to mention the various ports, if they properly communicated with its backers about the delays, they might have been forgiven. Looking at Mighty No. 9's Kickstarter page, we can see that backers went for long periods of time, sometimes months, without hearing any updates. Concept wouldn't officially announce delays until seemingly the last minute. In one instance, fans noticed that online retailers changed Mighty No. 9's release date, which Concept referred to as a mistake before announcing later that, indeed, the game was delayed. Even if Concept wasn't publishing information about the game on a regular basis, not being immediately transparent with backers regarding the game's status was definitely shady. Before the game launched, Concept revealed plans to create an entire media franchise out of Mighty No. 9, including a movie, an animated TV series, a manga, etc. We would eventually get a preview for the animated series, but that's all we've ever gotten, and in the wake of the game's lack of success, it seems the expanded universe idea is on hold. There's nothing wrong with wanting to make a franchise out of something, but if you're going to announce the next stage of the series before the first part even comes out, it just comes off as arrogant, and it begs an important question. If you have the funds necessary to move forward with an expanded universe before the initial product reaches the market, then what are you doing asking fans for their money? Speaking of which, on July 4th, 2015, well before Mighty No. 9 was released, Concept started another Kickstarter campaign for an entirely different game. The new project, called Red Ash: The Indelible Legend, was inspired heavily by the Mega Man Legends series, and we can assume it would have been a spiritual successor to Legends just as Mighty No. 9 is for the classic series, especially in the wake of the cancellation of Mega Man Legends 3. People were shocked and angry with Concept for trying to get another game funded before they had delivered Mighty No. 9. And it seemed more like a move made out of desperation or greediness rather than actually wanting to make another game. Red Ash's Kickstarter campaign was not successful, only raising about $520 million of the $800 million goal. However, as the campaign ended, Concept announced that the Chinese company Fuse would fully finance the game and help bring it to life. This only made people even more frustrated because if the project would have been funded anyway, there was no reason for them to put in their own money. And now it looks like Concept has abandoned Red Ash, or at least put it on hiatus, because aside from a publicly released pre-alpha build, the only thing to come out of the project is an anime short by 4C Studios called Red Ash Gear World, also known as Red Ash Magicicada. Honestly, the short isn't bad, as it has a pretty cool visual style and decent world building. But Red Ash only served to ruin Mighty No. 9's reputation, though Concept didn't need any other help on that front. Mighty No. 9's publisher, Deep Silver, released a trailer for the game in early 2016, giving people a glimpse into what they were about to experience. It was not well received. On top of just being a bad trailer with narration that heavily oversells the game's features, it strikes a tone that seems incredibly overconfident in the game's success and tries too hard to be cool that it ends up being irritating. Not to mention lines like this.
And make the bad guys cry like an anime fan on prom night.
Now, I'm no marketing expert, but it seems to me that insulting a sizable chunk of your core demographic is not the best way to sell a product. I don't know whether to blame Deep Silver or Concept or whoever for this, but this trailer and that line became instantly notorious. Truly, this was a masterclass in how to market a video game. I mentioned that Concept wanted to port Mighty No. 9 to various different consoles, with planned support for 10 different systems. Porting a game is not easy, and for an independent studio, juggling 10 different versions of the same game was guaranteed to be a disaster, especially given Concept's desire to release every port at launch. People may not like console exclusivity, but at least it means developers only have to build a game on one platform, which gives them more time to work on the game itself. However, Concept managed to release the game on 6 systems at launch, with Mac and Linux versions coming out 2 months later. So at least they could satisfy most of their backers in regards to their platform of choice. I repeat, most of them. The Nintendo 3DS and PlayStation Vita ports of Mighty No. 9 were delayed even further, with Level 5's acquisition of Concept being a likely reason why. Concept promised that the ports would still come out by the end of 2017. When did they actually come out? Well, they haven't. I don't know if it's because of incompatibility or the lack of support by Nintendo and Sony, but for whatever reason, these ports are as good as cancelled, with Concept having never given an official statement regarding their release. I can't imagine a majority of backers opted for these ports anyway, but considering these versions were the $3.5 million stretch goal, it's inexcusable that Concept went silent on their development. But okay, we're just scratching the surface of what went wrong with Mighty No. 9's campaign, and I could go on for hours about the mismanagement and bad press. However, regardless of how it came to be, Mighty No. 9 was eventually finished and released, and the product Concept created is what we're here to talk about. The story of Mighty No. 9's development is important to understand as a sign of what not to do, but whether or not the game itself is any good is a whole other ballpark. With that said, let's actually look at the game and see what the team at Concept managed to create despite the chaos that unfolded. Mighty No. 9 takes place in some version of America? I don't know if it's the future or an alternate reality, but whatever the case, it's a world where robots are built to serve alongside human beings. One day, however, all the robots are suddenly affected by some kind of affliction that makes them go berserk and turn on humanity. This includes the Mighty Numbers, robots designed by Dr. William White that have unique elemental abilities. However, the 9th Mighty Number, codenamed Beck, is apparently unaffected by whatever's causing the robots to go haywire. So Dr. White, alongside his friend Dr. Sonda and another unaffected robot named Call, tasks him with defeating and saving the other Mighty Numbers. This story is about as generic as it gets, without any distinguishing element to make it exciting to watch unfold. And in all honesty, this wasn't entirely unexpected. For the most part, the classic Mega Man games don't have in-depth stories either. It wouldn't be until the X series when that started happening. But in Mighty No. 9, the story is pushed to the forefront a lot, either through cutscenes between levels or character banter. So it's all the more noticeable how bland and uninspired this story is. The writing certainly doesn't help either. The dialogue sounds like it was ripped straight out of a Saturday morning cartoon or an anime dubbed by 4Kids.
Cheese and rice!
Then there's the characters, who really aren't even characters. They're just personality traits given 3D models, with no depth to them whatsoever. Beck is the reluctant hero, Dr. White is the determined scientist, Dr. Sonda is the bumbling coward, etc., etc. Now, in all fairness, the characters from the classic games weren't exactly incredible either. They're iconic for sure, but partially because of the limited technology, they never got the chance to really develop as characters. Mighty No. 9's characters are, in essence, just the Mega Man characters we all know and love, with 100% less charm. This is a problem that happens a lot with spiritual successors, especially those made by the developers of the original game. It's too easy to simply take the original characters and switch around their designs a bit and then claim you've made an entirely new character. Creating a good spiritual successor means knowing when to move beyond the source material and branch out into new territory, especially in the writing and character department. Mighty No. 9's story and character design feels like it was lazily put together in the last week of production, and calling it a bad replica of a classic Mega Man story would be far too kind. The major problem with the story isn't the writing or characters, however, it's how the story is presented. First, the game's visuals in regards to storytelling are just plain awful. Graphically, the game as a whole is alright, with detailed environments and fairly good enemy designs. But it doesn't look any better than an Xbox Live Arcade game from the early 360 days, in both animations and model quality. And on the PS4 version, I encountered some massive slowdown whenever there were too many visual effects on screen. Story-related visuals though? Ugh. Cutscenes are incredibly stiff, with models just standing in their poses with a single, unchanging expression on their face as they talk. The models themselves are okay, but with their lack of animation, it just looks like crudely made puppets handled by a puppeteer who couldn't be bothered to work them properly. It's hard to get invested in these characters when they just blankly stare sort of in the other's direction when they speak to each other. It also means that the voice acting doesn't always match the character's facial expressions, which takes you out of the story even further.
Gadzooks! That is not good!
On that subject, the voice acting in this game ranges from okay to terrible. The cast list does feature notable talent like Yuri Lowenthal, Matthew Mercer, and Steve Bloom, but most of the actors sound bored out of their mind half the time, probably because of a lack of good direction or preparation. Special mention goes to Julie Nathanson as Call, who really emphasizes the emotionless part of the emotionless robot character. I mean no disrespect to Julie, I'm sure she's a nice person, but her performance here is the definition of lifeless.
Professor, we're receiving an urgent call from Cherry Dynamics. I will patch it through.
It's definitely one of the most annoying parts of the game, partially because Call has quite a bit of dialogue, so you hear her dull, grating voice a lot as you keep playing. And you'll be hearing plenty of dialogue from everyone too, because during gameplay segments there's a lot of banter between them. Beck's companions and the mighty number he's facing will constantly chat with you while you're making your way through each level, which can sometimes make it difficult to concentrate on enemies and hazards. It can be a real nuisance because while the dialogue doesn't break the flow of gameplay, it throws something else at your brain that you have to focus on while playing. And even if you try to ignore it, it's still aggravating how often the characters speak to you, especially when the lines they say are poorly written and/or unnecessary. The frequent chatter makes it impossible for players to learn about the level and environment naturally, which may not seem like a big deal, but that can play a huge part in investing the player in the game's world. Instead of letting the stage speak for itself, Concept felt the need to explain every single set piece and background detail through character interactions. They prevent players from having that "wow, look at that" moment because they literally make the character say "wow, look at that" for everything you see.
Back! Look out!
So, the story isn't all that good, but what about the gameplay? Well, Mighty No. 9 is, on the surface, a classic Mega Man game with a slightly different skin. You control Beck as you make your way through several themed stages, gunning down enemies and confronting a boss at the end of each one. The stages aren't particularly long, and most of the time they're very straightforward in terms of where you need to go. You can move and jump as you'd expect, but Beck can also grab onto ledges and then jump out of the grab, which helps keep the pace going. Beck starts the game equipped only with a standard energy gun, and since I don't think there's an official name for it, let's just call it the Mega Buster because that's essentially what it is. You can only aim the Mega Buster left or right, and the only way you can influence a bullet's trajectory beyond that is by jumping. Beck's movement is a little sluggish and your aiming is limited, but with some practice you can maneuver around just fine. Shooting an enemy enough times will stun them for a little while, and when they're stunned you can perform a dash to not only destroy them, but also absorb their cells, which are what robots in this universe are made from. This will grant Beck temporary power-ups such as piercing bullets, additional defense, and faster movement. I actually kinda like the idea of absorbing an enemy's power like that, and the dash is a legitimately fun gameplay mechanic, which is also useful for getting across large pits or moving quickly across a room. In terms of controls, Beck is fairly responsive, and he has a decent weight to his movements. And despite the limited range of directions to aim, shooting enemies isn't usually a problem. When you defeat a mighty number, Beck will gain a new weapon which he can use in later levels. Just like Mega Man, these weapons, called reselections, provide Beck with unique powers that he can, in theory, use to gain an advantage over the stages and enemies. These weapons all have their own energy bar, so if you use it too many times, you need to wait for it to recharge or absorb enemy cells. You can hotkey 3 reselection weapons to change between them immediately, but for every other weapon, you need to access it through a terrible, god-awful menu. You know how in Mega Man you simply pause the game and choose the weapon you want? Well, they did that here, only in a sloppy toggle-based interface that doesn't pause the gameplay, meaning you'll get plastered by cheap shots while you struggle to choose the weapon you want. This is such a stupid design choice, and it would be more infuriating if these weapons were actually worth a damn. More on that in a bit. Each mighty number you face is weak to a specific reselection, so you need to figure out which of the weapons is right for the specific scenario. Or at least you would if the game didn't outright tell you which weapon to use. When you select a stage, this advice button plays some dialogue from a mighty number you've already defeated, and the weapon you received from that mighty number just so happens to be the weakness of the boss of that stage. So the concept of experimenting with weapons to learn which one to use on each boss is completely thrown out the window. And even if you experiment with these weapons in the stages, you'll learn that they aren't really that helpful. Mega Man games have always had the problem of weapon imbalance because they have varying levels of utility outside of situations where you need them to proceed. And as such, you always end up using some more than others. And for Mighty Number 9, the weapon selection, with a few exceptions, is pretty poor. There's some that are fun to use, like Battalion's weapon, a cannon that shoots remote missiles which cause massive damage when you detonate them, Aviator's weapon, which allows you to hover to slow your descent and also makes a decent saw/boomerang attack, and Brand's weapon, a sword that has short range but can also make you immune to projectiles and doesn't require any energy to use, aside from its charge-up attack. Other than that though, I rarely found myself using these weapons. Cryo's freeze gun is pretty decent since it freezes enemies in place and deals lingering damage, but I got this weapon too late in the game for it to be any real use. And Countershade's sniper rifle that shoots bouncing bullets I didn't use at all outside of the Aviator fight. Pyro's flame explosion, Dinah's taser gun, and Seismic's bulldozer attack? Never used them. Even when you consider each mighty number's weakness, there's almost no reason to use the reselection weapons because of one major problem. Because of how unwieldy most of these weapons are, you'll likely struggle trying to find the optimal time to hit these guys. And while they do more damage than the Mega Buster, most of the weapons are just too slow to effectively use. Every boss fight has multiple stages, and you need to hurt the boss enough times to stun them and then absorb their cells to move on. When they're stunned, however, they regenerate health, and the longer you take to absorb them, the more health they recover. So you need to stay close to them to bring them down quickly, which wouldn't be a problem, except that this makes the Mega Buster more useful most of the time. Often the best strategy is just to stand next to your opponent and spam the Mega Buster, then dash into them when the time is right. Sure, you may get hurt a lot this way, but with how fast the Mega Buster can drain these health bars, you'll usually win before they take you down. The mighty numbers as a whole aren't too difficult to deal with, though some of them have attacks that sap a considerable amount of your health. And some bosses have attacks that are either hard to dodge or make it difficult to fight back. Mostly though, it's just a matter of learning attack patterns and the right place to shoot at them from. However, one thing about the bosses that I do like is that when you defeat one, they'll show up in another stage. They'll provide Beck with assistance, usually by disabling a hazard, which is a cool idea and it makes them feel like more than just an end-of-level obstacle. It also helps make the stages a little more interesting, though while we're talking about them, the stages are where this game really drops the ball. They aren't the worst I've ever seen, but when they're not flat out boring, they're incredibly frustrating, and sometimes you get a nice mixture of both. None of the levels are well designed, settling for basic platforming mixed with traps whose only purpose is to irritate players who aren't expecting them. Because of that, it's hard to enjoy these stages, doubly so when you factor in the difficulty. Concept relied too much on the standards of classic Mega Man design without understanding what made that design enjoyable in the first place. Rarely do they try anything new, and when they do, it feels more like an annoying gimmick than an innovative mechanic. Take Countershade's stage for example, where the boss is constantly sniping at you and you need to find him by following his bullet trajectory. That's not a bad idea on paper, but it means traveling back and forth between the rooms you've already visited, which is tedious. Most levels have instant death obstacles as well, usually a bottomless pit or a set of spikes. Because if there weren't rooms covered head to toe in spikes, it wouldn't be classic Mega Man. Now, instant death traps can, if they're implemented properly, provide a sense of immediate danger that keeps the player on their toes. Here, you have entire stretches of level design filled with one-hit death obstacles in addition to regular enemies that serve no purpose other than to piss you off. The finale stages are especially guilty of this, and since they're so late in the game, they're just the cherry on top of the massive frustration you're likely to have. Like I said, these stages aren't the worst, but they feel more like a shoddy imitation of classic Mega Man stages rather than an evolution of them. Honestly though, that's basically what Mighty No. 9 is as a whole. It's a cheap copy of a classic Mega Man game made without any real understanding of what makes them so cherished to this day, and that tried to sell itself as the follow-up that fans desperately wanted. Here's the thing though, if it wasn't for the high profile of the game's director and circumstances of its development, this game would barely be worth talking about. Mighty No. 9 is nothing more than a poor attempt at a Mega Man game which is perfectly playable but is otherwise dull and uninteresting, not to mention aggravating to play. The stages aren't well designed, most of the weapons are barely worth using, and the story and presentation leaves a lot to be desired. I don't have much to say on the music either, because it was often drowned out by the characters talking and the constant sounds of weapons firing. Though you do have the option to choose an 8-bit soundtrack to replace the original one, which I think is a nice touch. This is a game that only appeals to Mega Man fans, and even then it's a hard sell because its design is so underwhelming compared to the classic series. Okay, so I realized after I finished the script that I forgot to talk about Ray, and I can't find a better place to put this section, so let's talk about her now. One of the stretch goals Concept added was a DLC character named Ray, who serves as Beck's rival and a not so subtle nod to the character Zero. She was released as DLC alongside the main game, free for backers and costing $5 for everyone else. The DLC includes a new stage that, once completed, allows you to play as Ray in her own campaign, which is just the levels from Beck's story with no additions as far as I can tell. Her campaign revolves around trying to find her apparent creator, Dr. White, to get answers on why her cells are deteriorating. But her story arc is heavily underdeveloped, and her narrative feels only half finished. Ray has a gameplay gimmick where she constantly loses health that can only be restored when you absorb an enemy's cells, which is pretty easy to do because her dash move instantly destroys most of these enemies. While this is an interesting mechanic in theory, these stages are just not designed with her gameplay in mind. Mighty No. 9's levels are built for precision platforming, not quick platforming, so Ray's gameplay is inherently flawed. There's no reason to justify playing through the game a second time just to experience Ray, so unless you're really curious, I say just don't bother. Anyway, back to the conclusion. Even if Mighty No. 9 was designed better and there weren't any development issues, it ultimately doesn't matter in the end for one big reason: Mega Man 11. Yes, in October 2018, Capcom released a new entry in the classic Mega Man series to the delight of both fans and critics, thanks in part to Koji Oda stepping up to replace Keiji Inafune's position as director. While it's far from perfect, it's miles better than Mighty No. 9, and is much more of a true Mega Man experience. With Mega Man 11's release alongside the Mega Man and Mega Man X Legacy collections, the future's looking brighter for the Blue Bomber. Meanwhile, it seems like Mighty No. 9's legacy will be entirely based on the controversy surrounding its campaign and mismanaged production. Keiji Inafune and Concept's reputations have been forever stained by this game, which is a shame because this project had so much promise. Still, there are lessons to be learned from Mighty No. 9 for both developers and gamers. Developers should understand their limits in regards to what they can create and build a good relationship with their community. And fans should know the dangers of falling into the hype that surrounds projects that they're excited about, especially when money's concerned. Every piece of media has the potential to be a failure, no matter how much money you put into it or how much experience you have. And riding on the coattails of a beloved franchise won't save your game from disaster if you don't put the right kind of effort into it. And above all else, even if you're convinced that you're making something fantastic, don't act all high and mighty about it.